Blog Talk Radio.
Lattimore improved the light, and J.A. Burr invented the lawnmower. Let me expand the mind of all you young soldiers. Sarah Boone invented the ironing board. Now my pants look crisp when I come on jobs, and William B. Purr.
Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of the Dupé Show. I am your host today, Dupé, coming to you live from Houston, Texas. And today I'm very happy to present my very special guest, Mr. John Ooko. John has written a new book, and I have to say I love the idea of the book. I'm not going to say I've read the entire book yet because this is one thick book. It's over 500 pages, but he's done a great job and came up with a great idea. And I first met John about a year ago in a library here in Houston, and we got to talking in the library, and he mentioned he was writing a book. And I was like, okay, yeah, brother, you writing a book. He's like, yeah, I'm writing a book on the first black president, which intrigued me, So we parted ways, and I hadn't heard from him for a little while. And next thing I know, he actually has finished his book and published his book. So John is joining us today to discuss his new book, Reflecting on America's First Black President. I want to welcome to the show Mr. John Ooko. Hi, John. How are you? John, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, I got you, sir. How are you? How are you this afternoon, this evening?
I'm all right. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, let me tell you, man, I think you have done a great job with this book. And, I think it's the first of its kind. Most of the books that are out there right now, for the most part are characterized President Obama in a negative light. And it's always about the politics in terms of what it means for this country. But to put him in a historical perspective for the world, including African Americans here in this country and Africans on the continent, I find it to be very fascinating. But let me start the questions with, I know I met you at your book signing, or I was there for your book signing. I was honored to speak at your book signing. It was a very nice event. But I didn't know your background was in engineering. You work for some of the big firms, and you were basically an IT consultant and engineer for companies in North America, South America, and Europe. So how does an engineer come to write such an important book on a subject so far from your area of expertise?
Well, that's good to know. Basically, I think the book it's a collection of my expression as an African, of which something that I'm really, really proud of. And it's my intention to tell my story. I've read lots of books, whether it's in my primary career area, which is the engineering area, books that are on just entertainment and everything else. And what's really baffled me and frustrated me over the years is that, most of the stories, whether it's my story, whether it's everybody's story, there's a lot that's written by Europeans. And, I've always grown believing that I was capable of doing everything. Those were some of the reasons why I chose engineering as a career. Whereas, in the areas and in the culture that I lived in, engineering wasn't as close to what everybody else had. And, and I'll tell you straight away, I was the first, engineer, not just for my family, but for a good section of culture, a social group that I came from. In Africa, we tend to talk so much about the village, being the first boy in the village and all that. But, I never grew up in the village as per se. But, with kind of that kind of perception, I grew up knowing that I wanted to do everything that anybody ever wanted to tell me that I couldn't do. And that included, writing my whole story, because I felt that, it was hard that I believed I could do everything, but most of the books that I read and used in the engineering life were mostly from Europe, and later on some of them came from America, and I wanted to do, first and foremost, write the story of my people. Some of the projects that I have coming on are going to be books or anything of the sort in my real life, but I can only convince, I would want to convince you that the most important thing that my people, whether, the blacks in the U.S. and everywhere else, need to counter immediately is to be able to win their history, their culture, before they actually win everything else, whether it's technology and all that.
Absolutely. I could not agree more, and I think you set a great example, and you're a great model in terms of just because your expertise or your area or whatever the case may be is not in one thing doesn't mean you can't do it. And I think that's a great example of, we can do many different things. We can have expertise in many different things. And so I think you're doing a great job of showing that. Once again, you can give us a call. You're going to talk to Mr. Ooko at 310-634-1902. John is the author of Reflecting on America's First Black President, an African perspective of global events critical to the overall black history. I love that. I'm a big fan of reading history and reading black history, so I could agree with much of what you were saying just now in terms of the importance of us knowing our story, not only knowing our story, but becoming custodians of our own story per se. And let me ask you this, though. Did something happen that particularly wanted you to tackle this notion of the first black president and mingle those two concepts together? I mean, what was the impetus for, you're doing your engineering thing, you're an IT consultant, and one day you got this idea. Tell us how the seed was planted to actually write this particular book.
A good direction to that question is reflected in the first paragraph of the introduction into the book. When I was growing up in Africa, because of a lot of efforts that I put in most of the things that I really wanted to do or just aspired to do, and I knew some of them were miles away from my reach, but that never stopped me. I could dream for them, and whenever I got a chance, I always tried to put them closer to what I believed I could do. And growing up in Africa 40 years ago is totally different from anybody who lived in the U.S. Of course, for the African American community, that time was almost the height of the civil rights movement. But 40 years ago, where I grew up, some of us even imagined of not just driving a car. That was there, but it wasn't easy even to dream of one day wanting to ride in a plane. And so somebody like me, some of those dreams was I knew, and I told friends of mine they could believe that, and that one day I'll have to ride in a plane. And so with that perception of always aligning myself with whatever I felt were not close to me but I wanted to achieve, I exposed myself, whether it was through books and listening to radio, listening to international radio, American, Voice of America, and BBC, and all those things. By the time I arrived in Europe, I had a good idea of what I believed I could tackle and some of the things that straight away I could easily criticize. So in the introduction to my book, I have indicated there that when I went to the museum, and just like you, my friend, I love history, I love culture, and that gives me in mind of being able to foresee and actually criticize straight away what I think is not right, and some of the things that probably I don't see as right. I actually bring them into me, trying to analyze and actually coming up with an understanding of why is it not right, or what is it that I don't understand about it that I may want to learn more. And so there, going through, I visited so many castles, I visited so many historical buildings like the churches, and then of course I visited the museums. And most of the museums in Europe, like you'd know, possibly right now, or you already know, or you've already heard so much. There's a lot of museum articles and museum objects that were taken away from Africa. And the work, of course, are the mummies that came from Egypt. And so I took so many photos next to a mummy, and, I was looking at that, and I told myself, what, something is not right here. And so straight away, I developed the objective that, what, the history of Africans, the way it's being told by mostly Europeans, is not what it is. On top of that, I realized that, the perception that we have in Africa, as regarding Europeans or Americans of European origin was not true. And so that was the theme of writing my story. And so for over 20 years, I've been developing a way of writing this story. There was a time about 5 years ago when I started collecting some of the items that I wanted to put in my story. I was looking for the right catch-up point of writing my story. I knew how my story was going to develop, but I didn't have the right catch-up point. And so when Obama came into the presidency, that was the indication, yes, this is it. I have to develop it from here, going backwards.
What an example. I love that because, A, you set out a plan, you had a desire, you had a dream, and now I'm holding that dream in my hand. I think that's such a powerful lesson for not only our young people, but everyone who has a dream and wants to pursue it and get it done. I love the idea that you had a concept in your mind that's now a physical object in the universe, you know.
Sure,
I try to teach that a lot because people think because something's not in their purview or if they're not aware of it, they don't see it, that it doesn't exist or it can't be. But if you put the seed in your mind and your heart first, you absolutely can. And you, my brother, testimonial to that. So I want to congratulate you again on a great body of work. As I said, I'm just getting into it. I'm loving what I'm reading so far. And I see you have used many of the great African scholars that I've studied over the years, people like John Henry Clark and Sheikh Anta Diop and Molefi Asante. Some of these brothers are contributing to your work. And I remember when we talked a couple of weeks ago at your book launch party, you mentioned that it really took you about 3 years to put this tome together. I wanted to ask you, so I know it involved quite a bit of research. In all that time, and in your research of African history as well as African American history, as well as mingling in your own stories, but in your research, what was the most surprising thing that you learned, or what was the thing that really took you back when you found out, when you discovered it doing your research?
Well, I think especially in the coming up with dates, there are certain, especially movements that I didn't realize that they were that deep from what I had already done before, or rather understood before. One of the research entries, in going through collecting stories of how the African American community were able to fight for representation, there was that section of a research that indicated that, you know what, whereas most people, especially, in the American circle, believe that the civil rights movement was around the 50s and the 60s. The research wanted to remind all of us that, you know what, that's something that started way back almost 50 years ago in the 1920s. So that was just one of them. And then going back into the European perspective, I came up with certain facts that I had thought, well, I knew straight away what they were. But, as I did my research, that threw me off sometimes. And, of course, I had to dig a little bit more to get my focus back. I realized that it wasn't as easy as I thought before. And the second thing was that there was more stories that I wasn't even ready to, put in my book. It would have taken, more years, and it would have taken more volumes to even come up with, the whole coverage.
Well, the beautiful thing about it for me, as I said, I've read a lot of what we growing up, we called it Black history, right? Which was history that's separated from American history because it wasn't included. And so now I'm supposed to take offense when you say Black history, like you're being exclusionary and not dealing with the history of why that term is there in the first place, because we were excluded. Anything with Black in front of in America first is because there was an exclusion aspect going on historically. Now they want to say, well, now that everything is equal and everyone is included, you can drop the Black. But we know, of course, that's not necessarily the case. That's more of a dream. And so looking forward, perhaps that can be the case. But right now, it absolutely is not, Black president notwithstanding. I think that you picked a fantastic